Hey guys, this is Daniel Cutright, host of the Winning Mentality podcast. Just wanted to take a minute before we get into the show today and say thank you to all of the listeners, your continual support. It's so much appreciated. And we're actually in the process now of looking for sponsors for the Winning Mentality podcast, which is exciting. And so if you want to get the word out about your brand, product, or event, we have some phenomenal guests coming up soon. You can reach out to me via email. It's cutrightpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, cutrightpodcast@gmail.com. And we can find a way to work together to tap into our network of loyal listeners to keep the show going strong. Support comes from listeners like you. So thank you again for your continued support, encouragement, and sharing each episode to spread these awesome stories and positivity they deliver. If you enjoy the show, you can show your support by donating via Venmo to username @winningmentality. You can think of Venmo as like a virtual tip jar. And so these donations will go towards hosting and production expenses, whether it's $1 a month or $10 a month. It's all appreciated and helps keep the show going strong. And so think of it like once a month, you're buying me, the host, a cup of coffee. I love coffee and I love doing the show. And so it's all very much appreciated. Even if it's just a one-time donation, that's awesome too, and can help us continue to grow the show and leverage additional resources to keep bringing on quality guests and inspire more and more people. And so if you decide to donate, feel free to also include a short message and let me know why, whether you just enjoy the conversations or maybe there was a specific episode that impacted you in some way, shape, or form. I would love to hear about it. Last thing before we get into the interview, I'm always appreciative of the listeners who take the time to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. These reviews and ratings help new listeners find the show and also let future sponsors know what the listeners like you think. Thanks to everyone who recently shared an episode on their Instagram and Twitter as well. Tag me and the guests from that week, and I'll do my best to reshare. So again, thank you for all the support. Now let's get to it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Winning Mentality. My name is Daniel Cutright, and I am super excited about the show today and our guests. Probably the most excited I've been about, or probably maybe one of the most interesting guests I think I've had on, Jim Miller. Jim, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. For the audience, let me give a little background here. This town, both of us in Charlottesville, obviously, big basketball town. And a lot of times people think basketball, they think Tony Bennett. But oftentimes they also think Ralph Sampson and the team back in the 1980s. And Jimmy, you were a part of that team, played basketball at Virginia from 1981 to 1985. And not just a part of that team, but when Virginia made their Final Four run, you were the East Regional MVP of that team, went on to get selected in the 1985 draft by the Utah Jazz, spent some time in the NBA. And so we're going to talk some Virginia basketball today. But that's what, Virginia basketball didn't stop there for you. After, leaving kind of pro basketball, getting into the financial services industry, you also got called up to start doing some color commentary in the Virginia Sports Network. So now you're one of the voices of Virginia basketball. Outside of that, if that wasn't enough on your plate, do some work with an organization called Piedmont CASA, which is supporting children and adolescents. It's an advocacy organization and really giving them a voice. And you also have the nickname, the Magic Man. And maybe we'll hit on that a little bit too. But Jim, I'm excited to have you on today, brother. Really appreciate it.
Daniel, thanks for having me, man. This is a great way to spend the day. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with some Virginia basketball here, Jim. For people that maybe don't know your background as much, how'd you get to Virginia? And let's maybe get into a little bit of like, what was it like playing during that era? Because I think people maybe have a pulse on kind of what the culture of the program is like now. But I'd even love to hear just the culture of what it was like playing back then for you guys.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in West Virginia, a small little town in West Virginia, and had the opportunity. I was being recruited to play in the ACC, and back then, the ACC was a beast. It was no question the best conference in the country for basketball, and so my choices came down to Duke, Wake Forest, and Virginia. And I ended up coming to Virginia because they were preseason ranked #1 in the country. And they had the greatest college basketball player ever in Ralph Sampson. So coupled with everything else, coaching staff, who's Terry Holland and the guys under him, Jim Larinaga, who's gone on to be successful, Craig Littlepage, Dave Odom. Those were the assistant coaches. And so during my time. And so it made the choice pretty easy to come to Virginia for I checked all those boxes, right? And then when you look at Virginia, kind of their style then versus kind of now, I think there's some similarities. Both teams are, I would say, were defensively oriented. Certainly, you know that of the era now for the people who follow the program now, but for the older folks who've been around and watched back in those days as well, we started. I think we're a very physical team, and the emphasis was on the defensive end as well. I'll say too, probably both teams then and now do a great job of preparing. So we were, you got to remember the conference back then, they have 8 teams or something in the ACC. So everybody knew everybody, right? And it's not expanded like it is now. So we were playing everybody twice, home and away. And so there was really no place to hide. But outside of the conference, we always did really well, I think, just because we did a great job of preparing for those guys. Much like Tony Bennett and his staff now, they do a great job of preparing, not only in conference, but you give them 2 days to prepare. They're gonna be pretty good, and they're gonna be able to compete.
Yeah, Virginia is a very different matchup for teams now. Just their style of play. Would you say that you guys were similar? And how did you see other teams kind of responding to how they wanted to play against you, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, I think if you polled everybody else in the league and around the country, Virginia was a tough matchup because we had that 7'4" guy in the center, Ralph Sampson, like nobody else could. You didn't know how to prepare for that. You couldn't replicate that or in practice at all. So, he got all the attention, and there was no shot clock back then. So, at least early on in that, they experimented with it later. But it was a hard, and physical. I mean, the game was very physical. I think it's a different the way the game's played today. And back then it was very physical, and guys would, the play all centered around inside. Now there's so much emphasis on the 3-pointer, and
Right.
So that's changed the game. It's opened up the floor perhaps a little bit, but back then, man, Ralph was down low, and there were probably 4 or 5 other bodies all occupying that space.
Wow. I would imagine though, like having Ralph down low like that and drawing so much attention, that probably opened some things up for guys like yourself too.
Well, yeah, it did. It allowed guys to I can speak for myself. Yeah, I mean, all those guys made me better without them, right? It was so a lot of times when I was getting the ball, I was probably viewed as a slasher, scorer type, and a large part of that was because I had great teammates around me, getting the ball to me where I could do something with it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. How was Ralph as a teammate, just as a whole? I mean, obviously we talk about how good of a player he was, but when you think about being on the team with him, what was that like?
It was amazing. On so many levels. I mean, he changed my life. Let's start there. Me coming to Virginia and playing with that guy, I had no idea what that was going to be like. And there's been no player really since him. There was no player like him before. And so how lucky was I to be a teammate of his for a couple of years, and all that came with that. So I as we get older, and you have an opportunity to reflect back, I was very grateful for that time, to be able to play with him, and all that came with that was just a tremendous experience.
Yeah. You mentioned coming to Virginia in general. It kind of changed your life, growing up in smaller town, West Virginia, and then coming out here to school. Maybe you had mentioned when we spoke before, just the opportunities that opened up for you just in life in general. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I grew up in a small town, and I joke. People say, "Well, is there a big town in West Virginia?" But coming to Charlottesville was like coming to a big town, and so my mother and father divorced when I was 8 years old, and so my mother basically raised me and my sister, living paycheck to paycheck. So I was looking back, fortunate that I had people in and around in the community that helped me.
Yeah.
Just to on a Sunday afternoon. He's not going to be listening to this, and I haven't talked to him in decades now. But a guy named Gary Alvis was my my first little league basketball coach, and when I only played because all my friends were playing. It's not like, I played all the sports, and that's what we did. I didn't really want to go out for basketball, but my mother said, "No, you're going to go out."
Yeah.
And then Gary Alvis would, he'd pick me up on a Sunday afternoon at our apartment and take me we'd find an outdoor hoop somewhere, and he'd just play with me for a couple of. I had people like that in my life that I'm so grateful for, that just kind of helped me even explore what playing basketball at the next level would even look like. But at a young age, you don't know it, and you're just kind of going through it. And
yeah.
And Daniel, it wasn't until I was in 10th grade before I even realized, like, maybe I can play college basketball outside of my hometown.
Yeah.
That's reality.
And you would say that was because of those coaches that kind of got you to that point in the first place, that believed in you, that were, building you up in that way?
That's right. It's just, I was basically surviving day to day with no real direction of what life might look like after college.
Yeah.
Much less where I would even go to college. There was a college down the street in a town that's even smaller than Princeton, called Athens, West Virginia. Wow. Where Concord College is located, and I think they call it Concord University now. But that's where everybody I knew went, and and then they sent me a letter, and they said, you could come here and play basketball. I thought, wow, how cool is that? I could go there and play basketball. And then, we got into our sophomore year and things started to develop, but it wasn't till then that, I didn't know what that was going to look like.
Yeah. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day too, because I, have a background in coaching, and you just start to realize, especially with the high school age or even younger, it's such a malleable time frame for kids. And to just have, I think coaches that are listening to this, you play such a pivotal role in kids' lives, because sometimes all they need is just that extra encouragement that they're not getting elsewhere. Maybe they're not getting it from home. And so I think, it's just such a vital topic, is a lot of these kids, they don't even know or realize maybe what that next step is, or that's even available. I was, standing at a track meet this past weekend, and a particular college coach, she was talking to a high school athlete that she was recruiting, And I overheard the athletes say, I wasn't even thinking about running in college. I've never had a coach reach out to me before. I'm really excited about this, but I think just to have those people along the way, like you're saying, and whatever it is, to just offer that encouragement. It's like, you never know what that path is going to look like for that kid, is, what they're going to turn into. If they're going to be somebody like yourself that goes and, becomes the East Regional MVP in the Final Four, goes on to play in, professional basketball. It's, those people are, I think, it's just so pivotal. So if you're a coach listening to this, or anybody that's working with young people, I wanted to reiterate that point.
Yeah, no, and you're so spot on. See, I growing up in West Virginia, we came from an area where we had a saying that always leave your campsite better than you found it.
Yeah.
And it just makes sense now, right? These guys, these people that you're referencing, coaches, parents of teammates of mine, all kind of took a liking to me, I guess, and they helped guide me. And now as we've gotten older, right, that's what we do now, right? We see young people, whether it's an athlete or a student, and that has potential, and we all have potential inside us. So identifying that and helping young people, and I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I want to come back to that in a few moments when we kind of talk about what you do with Piedmont CASA a little bit. Maybe before we go that route, just kind of shifting back to, thinking about basketball, when you think about maybe some of the most memorable moments playing at Virginia, like whether it's like maybe one of the funniest stories that you had, or one of the most memorable games, I think people like to hear that type of thing too.
Yeah. I like, there's so many fleeting moments, right, that come through your mind when asked something like that. And sure, there were specific games. Remember, the conference was much smaller then than it is now. So when we played Carolina, was like Carolina was Carolina, and they had James Worthy, Sam Perkins, Michael Jordan. I'll stop with those three. But they had All-Americans at every position and at the end of the bench, and I remember playing them at home my first year at Virginia, and we won that game, and it was off the charts. You had, Ralph Sampson, James Worthy, Sam Perkins, like just those guys, that battle and the build up into a 17 or 18-year-old kid, right? His first year at Virginia, right? You're like, wow, I remember watching these types of games on TV, and now you're in it. And I don't know, we were ranked 1 and they were 2, or vice versa, right? And it was a high level game, and we won. And the town, Charlottesville, was elated afterwards in the corner and all that stuff, right? It was just that was a surreal time. All the way to Ralph's last home game against Maryland, and the build up. And the ushers all wearing tuxedos, and the magnitude of that game. I could go on and on, Daniel. I mean, there was the Georgetown game, the battle between Patrick Ewing and Ralph at the Cap Center in Landover, Maryland. The hype on that game was the biggest college basketball game probably since Lou Alcindor and Elvin Hayes back in, what was that, 69 maybe or something. And then, of course, our run to the Final Four and beating those teams to get there. And, those were all memorable experiences, to be a part of.
Yeah. So after Virginia, you went on to play with the Utah Jazz, got drafted
for a cup of coffee. I got drafted the same year Karl Malone came into the league, and
wow.
I think he's the last I saw is a top 50 all-time NBA player, and so Utah, after going through camp, here's a funny story. This is true, right? I played most of my career with my back to the basket. certainly in high school, and then a lot in college. And then in college, I started to face a little bit, but I never put the ball on the floor more than 2 or 3 times before I was either shooting it or passing it to somebody else. And my first NBA camp, now I'm going up against like a guy like Karl Malone. They're like, okay, that's not going to work out. So let's move you to the 3 position, right? Small forward, probably the most skilled position in all of basketball, because you got to be able to do it all, including handle the basketball. Then a guy went down with an injury, a guard. So they moved me to the 2 guard. And there I am in my first NBA camp with a 24-second shot clock, dribbling the ball up the floor and trying to get us into our offense. I'm getting us into our offense with like 7 seconds left on the shot clock. So it was not good. I think Utah made the right decision by keeping Karl Malone and saying thanks, Jim, but not this time.
Oh, so I didn't realize all that, actually. That's yeah.
Yeah, you weren't there. I was there. It was a lot of people don't realize that. It's not something I go around talking about. No, it's all good, man. I was grateful for the experience.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk about, because I think a lot of athletes go through this too, but when you transition from being involved with a sport your whole life to then there's that time, it's like life after basketball or fill in the blank of whatever sport. I know I went through this as an athlete, and I talked to so many athletes that's a hard season, is making that transition. So maybe speak to that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, man, that's it was a really difficult time in my life. So when I got cut by Utah, right, and like every kid who's at that level thinks that's okay. This is your goal, is to play in the NBA, and then I got cut, and so I went to Europe, and I played in Europe for a couple of years. I came back, and then I ended up playing in what they back then was the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association. And I only share this because to give it the context to your point. I thought, okay, if I got lucky enough, I could be in the right position, seen by the right person, I could make it in the NBA. I could be a 10th guy. I'd be the best teammate, right? Yes, sir, no, sir. The first one to practice, last one to leave, all that stuff. But I felt like I needed to be visible and not playing in Europe. So I made the conscious decision of them playing in the CBA. And I did that for 2 years. And I saw guys playing in the CBA who were journeymen, who had been in the CBA for 8-9 years. And I remember saying to myself, I don't want to be one of those guys, because you're not playing in the CBA for the money. You are chasing a dream. And I was ready to if I'm not going to make it, okay, I've got to go on to the next thing in my life, which really then for those of us who played at that level, I didn't know what that was going to be. I admire people who aspired and knew they were going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or they had some other career. That wasn't me. I did not know. And so that was to your point, that was a very difficult time when my career kind of came to an end. And now what? And it was easy a year to kind of navigate kind of what that next thing would look like. And a very difficult time when your whole life, your whole playing career has been centered around this sport and your whole identity in many ways. Performers do that, right? And so that was a difficult, really difficult time.
Yeah, no, I totally connect with the identity piece, because you're right. You're so wrapped up into it for your whole life, and then it's all of a sudden it's like that is stripped away from you, and you're reaching for things. You start to, okay, how do I fill that void? What does that next step look like? So for you, I mean, after you kind of took that year and like started to come out of that, like where did you find yourself, and how did you make it really out of that transition?
Yeah, Daniel, for so many of us, it's like, okay, we played, what do we do after our playing days? And I thought, well, okay, I got to get into coaching. And so I coached for 2 years. My first year was a volunteer at my high school in Princeton, still training, working out every day, because then I thought, okay, I'll go back to Europe and I could play over there for 10 more years and see parts of the world, et cetera. And then I got a coaching job at Randolph-Macon College under a legendary coach and a guy named Hal Nunley. And he was a extremely cerebral basketball coach and really a bright mind. And I was under him for a year, and then like saw the path and the how would I say this, the not so nice side of college recruiting and all that stuff, right? It just like I saw the other side of it, man. And we all wanted the top 50 position. You know, I want to be an assistant in the top 50 program in the country. Well, get in line, right? There are 500 other guys that want to do the same thing, Jim. And so I'm like, well, okay, I could go and bounce around to these small different schools to find my way. And anyway, I was still navigating what you were just asking about. That was a very difficult time to then walk away from basketball. You know, and okay, I'm not going to coach, and I'm going to, like, what am I going to do? And because I went to Virginia, I had made some contacts here in Charlottesville that gave me the opportunity to come back to Charlottesville and start, you know, working in the real world, as they would say, you know, and that you know, I could, where would I going to go? I'm going to go to Charlottesville because that's where I went to college and I knew people. And now I've been here for 30 years. So here we are.
Yeah. I asked you that question because I know that's something that so many people go through. And I like how you mentioned that is the next step. A lot of times you think, okay, well, I want to stay in the sport, so let me get back into coaching. I mean, I even think back to like what I even studied in college, you know, exercise physiology. Oh, this will make me more marketable as a coach coming out, so I can stay in the sport. But yeah, I think it is that people go through that hard season of just, you know, making that adjustment. And then oftentimes what you find is athletes end up in maybe even industries like you're in now, something that is a little bit more competitive, or maybe it's a sales position or something like that, because they're still trying to satisfy that itch, so to speak. Would you say any of that was involved with, you know, kind of the career path you chose coming out of maybe the basketball side of things, or what led you into financial services?
Well, that's a great question. Because there are elements of everything you just described to be successful in this industry. But for me, when you ask, you know, why, what's your why? You got to remember, I grew up in small town in West Virginia. Mother and father divorced when I was 8 years old. My mother lived paycheck to paycheck, and we didn't know any better. But I was a survivor. And, you know, we didn't have any resources. And so I knew at an early age, I did not want this for my family. And, you know, it's no good or bad or whatever. You know, it was when my mother and father divorced, you know, that was a hard time. And you know, I don't think parents just get divorced. You know, they wake up one day and like get divorced. Like there was a couple years even before that where there's a lot I use a volatility in our house. You know, arguing back and forth. And you know, as I got older, I learned more about it. I couldn't understand it as a 6, 7, 8 year old. But my father was an alcoholic, and he ultimately died of cirrhosis of the liver. And so that made an impact. It left a deep impression on a young person. And so when I saw us as a family really struggling to just kind of live week to week, month to month, I knew that I did not want that for my family. And so fast forward, as I'm navigating my own career and my identity and what am I supposed to do, where am I supposed to do it, and with whom, that led me to this industry. You know, I always had an interest in money and how money worked. And while we didn't have any of it, I learned at an early age, it's less about how much you have and what you do with what you have. And so I learned at an early age to be a saver. And so I would mow lawns all over and shovel snow in the winter. And I just put that money, you know, in a shoebox, really. You know, so I adopted that philosophy early on. I call it pay yourself first. And that's my why. That's why I do what I do now in helping families. And we've done a great job of connecting with senior level executives, business owners, retired folks, and young professionals, helping them navigate every different phase of their lives to have their money work for them in the most efficient manner possible. And that's why I got into this business. And it's gratifying because I know I'm helping people when I get a client who sends us a box of chocolate, you know, saying thank you, or just a handwritten note, we appreciate your support. That is a reminder of why we do what we do.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I love what you said there too, because I think a lot of times, you know, people can use their situation as an excuse or as a reason. And a lot of times people will look at their situation of maybe their upbringing and maybe try to cast blame or rationalize why they are a certain way. But then I think there's other people who they have a situation and they use it and they view it as, this is my reason for why that's not going to be me. And they use that as really a positive. It's something that shapes them and they use it for good. And that's what you're doing. And that's, I think there's such a lesson in that, you know, because whoever's listening to this, right? Like you've got something going on in your life, maybe in the past or maybe right now, that's adversity, that's not ideal. But how you view that is you can choose to view that as, okay, I'm going through this right now. Maybe this is something that I can use to help somebody else in the future. Or you could be on the other side where you're just, you know, it's a pity party and you're just, you know, casting blame and that sort of thing. And that's not to say that you don't empathize with that situation, but I think the way that you view those things that you go through and seeing people like yourself, Jim, that you can turn that into something that's now benefiting so many other people is huge.
Well, yeah, you know, I heard a coach just say in the last week, everything you want is on the other side of hard.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, that's anything that's worth having or doing shouldn't come easily. That's been my experience. And so how you use, to your point, how you use adversity to grow from and to learn from shapes us, and you can choose to use it and grow from it. And that's what I hope most of us try to do.
Absolutely. You know, I'm not always the biggest quote guy, but one of my favorite quotes was from Tony Bennett. It was after and you know the quote I'm going to say too, after they lost to UMBC, you know, Tony said, adversity when used the right way will take you to a place that you've otherwise never been. And I may be off by a word or two, but just that point he made there is, I think about that quote just so often. And so, you know, on that note, you get the chance now to cover Virginia basketball, and you've gotten to see Tony Bennett up close and, you know, really how he operates. And, you know, Tony's a guy that, right, like even if you're a Virginia Tech fan, like, right, you really can't not like the guy. He's one of those guys. And but talk about what that's been like, being able to cover Virginia basketball now from a broadcasting standpoint, and how you got into broadcasting. Because when you told me this story before too, I really liked just kind of that progression of, you didn't say yes the first time, right?
And Tony, he pulled me over to the side, and I went to watch practice shortly thereafter, and he came over to the side, and I didn't know him that well then, and I'm sure I know he didn't know me that well, but he knew I said no, and he came over and so you said no, like you turned it down. How could, like, and the reality was because we just started our company here, and so I felt like it was really important for me to be visible, and while we were transitioning and all that stuff to start our company, and so then fast forward 12 years later, or no, it wasn't 12, but 6, I think it was, right? That they came back to me again and said, hey, and this, would you be interested in doing this? And I'm like, well, can I have the weekend to think about it? And I went home and I talked it over with my wife, and we looked at the schedule, and there's going to be some travel involved, and she was very supportive, which is important, right? I mean, our kids were young then, but I said, listen, if I say no the second time, they're not going to come around for a third time. That's for sure. So the field, the profession always interested me. I always kind of, as I was that kid in the driveway growing up, I'd be by myself out there doing a basketball game between the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers. I was Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain and Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe all at the same time. And I was Marv Albert calling the game. I mean, that was the kind of the passion that I brought to that. And so I look at it now, Daniel, all these years, as we get older, we get settled in, right? And we get comfortable. And when I was asked to do this, if I would be interested, I'm going to get to see basketball up close, more than just a casual fan that as I had been. And so I'm going to get to know these players, and these are great kids on this team. Yeah. I'm going to get to know the coaching staff, and man, you get to know them like they're the real deal, but it's also, it was going to get me outside of my comfort zone. Right. And I think it's really important as we continue to get older and to stretch ourselves. And so learning a new craft and trying to get better at it. And I still am a student of it. And that was part of the reason why, too. I wanted to put myself out there, and in a very public way, too, because if you can sink or swim in a very public forum, and that can be uncomfortable if it doesn't go the way you had hoped. And but I was, I wanted to do that, and fortunately, I mean, we've had 5. Listen, my first 2 years, we were 66-6, 6 losses in those first 2 years. Holy cow! And doing it, so the team was great. They are great, and they were great then. And so I was there when they lost to UMBC, to reference your, ticket of adversity. And then I was there the following year when they went to win the national championship. It's made it very enjoyable. I always said, if I don't enjoy it, like I'll step away and
yeah.
So even when we lose 3 or 4 games in a row and you experience adversity, there's you take a step back for a second, like, man, you're watching great ACC basketball with these great young men and the great coaching staff and a great fan base at Virginia, like all this, like, you're not going to do this forever. Enjoy it and be in the moment while you're doing it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I always try to remind Virginia fans too. I'm like, hey, you guys don't realize how good you have it here. It's we've had it pretty good over the last few years, and
yes,
somebody like Tony Bennett running the ship, that's hard to get much better than that. But what would you say?
I want to share a quote, because you referenced, like, he's got a ton of them, right? And he said something that we have. If you came to my office and you walked in our lobby area, you'd see it up on the wall, and it's an old African proverb that he has quoted and said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And like that resonated with me when I heard that. And so much that what we do here professionally, it's a team. And when I look at my greatest successes and joy that I've had, it's been centered around a team. I think that's really important when you're talking about who's on the bus with you. And I got great people here that work with me. And so that's another Tony Bennett kind of saying that, like, yep, you know what? That's good stuff right there.
Yeah. And you obviously know him way better than I do, but that's one of the things that's always impressed me about him too, is I'll always watch his post-game interviews, and just, when he starts out those interviews, it's usually very lighthearted with a sense of humor. And even when they lose a game, but he's very, there's no walls between him and those that are asking him the questions. Oftentimes I feel like you see coaches or players get up there and it's almost this vibe of it's them against the reporters. And whereas Tony, it's like the people that are asking him the questions, like, he wants to make them feel welcome. And he realizes that, for Virginia basketball to be successful, it's more than just the team on the floor. It's all the people that are a part of Virginia basketball. I get the sense that he's very aware of that. And that's just how he is. Like, I don't think he has to, put on a facade or try to do that.
No,
I think that's just who he is.
That's authentic. That is, he is that. If you studied their 5 pillars, and what I was just hearing you talk about, made me think of the pillar of unity. A house divided will not stand.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
that's one of the things that from all the guys on the floor to his staff to the managers, everybody else involved with the program, they are very much a part of the team, and he strongly believes that, and that's a non-negotiable. For him.
Yeah. Well, we got a few more minutes here, Jim, and I want to just ask you kind of another point of the broadcasting here really quick, is just maybe what is one of the biggest maybe learning curves that you saw? And I'm particularly fascinated in kind of the broadcasting and media space, obviously because I run this podcast and I do some track and field announcing myself, but for you, like, maybe one of the biggest learning curves. And then when you think about somebody that, as you observe other announcers or color guys, like, something that you think makes somebody really good.
A couple things there. One, saying what you got to say in a short, concise manner is all people that know me, that's been a challenge, right? So learning how to do that on the radio, describing what you just saw and do it in a very, very concise manner. One of the challenges early on, I think, for all of us, is the speed of like, when you're there and you're trying to learn the fundamentals of broadcasting. The game was, you've got a million things going through your mind, and I want to say something on that, and then another play happens, and let me talk about that, and you might not get back to that, and there I am, you're watching the ball, so all that's happening on the ball, and meanwhile, if you can take a step back and, like, read the body language of the players off the ball, or things that are developing off the ball. So it took a little bit of time early on. The game was really fast, and then as I started to settle in, the game slowed down. If that makes sense to our viewers, and which opened up everything, a lot of things. So it allowed you to kind of see the whole game and not just the ball.
Yeah, that's really good. I think about now how I even watch basketball, because I played a little bit, but I was never that engrossed in the sport, other than the fact that I've just been a fan for a long time. But I'll find myself now, even when I watch a game, I'll try to watch players that don't have the ball. I think it's really easy to get glued on just the guy that's got the ball. But I'm like, what are these guys doing in the post? What's this guy doing over here that's setting the screen? Like, on the pick and roll, like what's happening away from the ball? What's happening on defense? And so I think, to your point, when you can observe those things and bring that context to the audience and like point those things out, that's huge in helping people like understand the full picture of what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it. That's what you're trying to do, and convey the whole picture, and do it in a short, concise way.
Yeah, and so for the guys that you think, that was something you had to learn, obviously. Are there other guys that you have viewed as, sports broadcasters? And I even saw you did something with Jay Billis a while back, or maybe guys like that. Are there other guys that you kind of observe or, study how they do things?
Yeah, well, Jay's obviously very good at what he does. And when I was young, Hubie Brown has been around the game for 50 years or more, right? Like I think he's really good. And Doris Burke, I think she's great, and I can listen to her talk and make a point as clear as anyone.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And now that you say that, I'm like going back and I'm like, what makes her so good? And maybe that's something I need to go back and listen to some more of her clips and study. But you're right, she's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, you do a great job on there too. I love listening to. There's often times where I can't catch the game on TV because I'm on the road somewhere, and I'll flip on 97.5 and hear you guys on there, and I love it.
Thank you.
So as we start to wrap up here too, I did want to take some time and talk to you a little bit about what you do with, again, if you weren't wearing enough hats already, Jim, what you do with the Piedmont CASA organization. And this is actually where I really first got introduced to you. I went to the bracket breakfast that you do as an event to, create awareness and to raise money for Piedmont CASA, an organization that, advocates for children and adolescents. And you can speak a little bit more to the mission there. But I knew that this was something that was really important to you, and that you were passionate about. And it's because when, you were at that event and you had the young man get up and share, you were getting emotional just, introducing this guy. And I know that for me, it's, I think about oftentimes the things, there's been instances in coaching where, talking about a kid's story, I'll start to get emotional. And I think that's a good sign. I think that's a good indicator that you're in a place that you're supposed to be in. And so maybe just talk about the organization a little bit, kind of how you got involved and what you guys do.
Yeah, Piedmont CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates, and they train to the core. They train volunteers like you and me in the community on how to go into the court systems to advocate on behalf of abused and neglected kids. And then they've developed this Bridges to Success program, where now those kids who are 18 and older and are transitioning, they get assigned a coach, if you will. And oftentimes these volunteers become one of the most important relationships in these young kids' lives. And you heard Stephen Perry speak at the bracket breakfast and to talk about his experience. And I think back to, when I was a young person. Well, I was never physically abused. I saw a lot of hardship around me. And so when I think of getting it when we had the opportunity to pick and choose what we might get involved with. My wife and I zeroed in on Piedmont CASA, and we've been affiliated and supporting for 15 plus years now. And I've served on the board there, and my time has rolled off. But during that time, we kind of came up with the brainchild of creating this bracket breakfast. And so you were kind enough to attend it, and so you got to get a feel for what that's like. And we, it's not about me, right? It's about bringing people together to support a cause for really horrific settings for young people. And I thought we did a pretty good job of capturing that at this last event. And that's what we're trying to build on, trying to grow and continue to create awareness in the community and raise important dollars. I mean, it takes thinking outside of the box. It's not funding a scholarship or building bricks and mortar. It's really money that gets put to use to support volunteers who oftentimes become the eyes and ears of the court for these young people.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I was very much, touched and impacted, and, I had to keep my eyes from sweating a little bit when, Stephen shared his story, because that was, you're right. I mean, that's a lot of times people don't realize what these kids go through,
Yeah.
One thing I think would be good to end on too is you had mentioned before when we were talking, you're doing a lot of things. You've stepped into a lot of these things that maybe were even uncomfortable at the start. And I think a lot of times people, they will not do things out of fear, or you called it risk reward, right? People will make every excuse on why to not start something. And there's a lot of people listening that they've thought about starting a business. They've thought about, doing something that's outside of their comfort zone right now, but they keep reminding themselves of every reason not to. Maybe just speak to kind of that risk reward mindset for a second, and what's kind of allowed you to just take the step on some of these things.
Daniel, that's an excellent point. I think that all of us have mentors, advisors, friends in our lives, and I told you earlier why I got into the financial services industry, and I was working for one of the big firms, and had a client who's also a friend and a successful business owner come to me and say, "Jim, when are you going to go do this on your own?" And I had to think about that. And for people who know me, I'm very methodical and deliberate, and I don't make quick, rational, emotional decisions. And it took me, I said, you know what, let me think about that. And it took me a couple of years to understand how and what that might look like to my family. And when we decided to leave the big brand and go start our own company and doing what we did, my kids were 4 and 2 at the time. And I went home and I talked it over with my wife. And if we had 3 or 4 different options, the most difficult was going to be going and starting our own. Nobody's going to know our name, and how do we tell our story? And we might not have any clients that come with us. That's great, Jim. Good luck to you, right? And stay where they are, right? We had to do all that. And when I look at why I was doing it, right, the reward was I'm going to get to spend time with my kids who were 4 and 2 when I wanted to. So if they were playing in a sporting event or a piano recital in the middle of the day, I would have the flexibility to be able to do that. And I didn't have that, when I was a young person, right? We oftentimes are working for somebody else and we don't have the flexibility. And so I wanted to be able to do it and say I tried it, and if I failed, well, that's not the first time, right? I pick myself up and I'll go get another job.
Yeah.
And that's, but if it works, and that's, Daniel, to your point, why people don't oftentimes take that leap is the fear of failure.
Yeah.
And I didn't want, fast forward now 12 years, it'll be 12 years for us in August of this year. I didn't want to fast forward 12 years and look back and say, gosh, what if I had the courage to have left my company back then, what it might be like. And so once I worked through that, then it's like, okay, let's take the risk. My wife was supportive. You got to have a good network of people to support you and good people to work with you. And I had both. And so we made that move, and I have no regrets looking back now. We're still looking forward and how we can continue to be better than the way we are today.
That's awesome. Awesome. I think that's a great way to wrap it up, Jim. That's huge for people to hear that. So many times there's people that they're sitting on the edge and they need that little kind of kick in the pants to do it. One more thing that I heard is the guy who said one time, he said, even if you fall flat on your face, the worst you do is break even. And I always think about that, like you said, you get back up and go again. So, but that's awesome. Well, Jim, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. How can people find out maybe more about what you're doing as far as with Piedmont CASA, or just even about Miller Financial Group?
Well, I'd say with Piedmont CASA, go to the website.
Yep.
pcasa.org, PCASA.org, I believe is the website. But they're always looking for volunteers, and then of course, if you want to find us online, we've got an online presence as well, Miller Financial Group, and we'd love to talk to anybody and everybody.
Awesome. Well, good stuff, man. Well, we're looking forward to, it's not gonna be too long before we're back on the radio for basketball season. It's gonna be coming up on us quick here, so really excited for it. But Jim,
Daniel, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation, and I know people are going to get a lot out of this, so appreciate you being on.
Absolutely.
All right, take care, Jim.